Fide.email, you don't need to compromise faith to participate in the modern world. Instead of pushing ads and invasive practices that conflict with Catholic values, we built Fide to reclaim technology for Christendom. When you use Fide.email, you declare your commitment to technology that defends Christian tradition. Join Fide.email today and use technology to advance Christendom.
So it was inevitable, especially since Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez still has a job in the Roman Curia as the prefect for the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, though that job could end in the next couple of months if the rumors are true, which the general whispers out of Rome are that the key positions in the Roman Curia are going to be announced by Pope Leo XIV soon. Now, Victor Manuel Fernandez, as the prefect for the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, only has a couple of years left on his term, if my math is mathing correctly this morning, so he may let him write it out. Cardinal Arthur Roche, the mastermind behind Traditionis Custodes, he's hit retirement age, or he's about to, and so he's an easy replacement for the Pope, and he could do so without ruffling a lot of feathers, which seems to be kind of core to the whole unity talk we get now from him a lot. But Fernandez spoke, and it wasn't good. He gave us news on something that many of you will consider to be non-negotiable on whether you trust Pope Leo XIV or not, and that is Fiducia Supplicans, the document that authorized priests and bishops to offer blessings for James Martin types and their relationships. And yes, I read the document. It's very explicit. It includes their relationships, and I don't know why anybody dances around the issue. I read the document. It says it. The people don't want to listen. They don't want to accept that something as heinously evil as that could actually have been authorized by a man accepted by the world and by 99 to the ninth power percent Catholics as Pope. We go to a website that is not in any way a radical traditionalist website, Il Messaggero, which is out of Italy. I had to use Google Translate for this, so bear with me here on any weird syntax. Vatican, Cardinal Fernandez assures that Leo XIV will not retire the blessings for James Martin couples. But the African Cardinal Fridolin specifies it contains fundamental doctrinal problems. The Cardinal from Africa is not wrong. This is from Fernandez himself. Now, maybe he's just talking out of both sides of his mouth or somewhere else, and the Pope will come down on him by quietly retiring him or sending him to go be the papal nuncio to the penguins or something in Antarctica. But I don't think Fernandez would speak on this publicly with a website with the highest profile that it does, like Il Messaggero, and say these things unless he had very good reason to believe it was true. Here are the details from this article, and we'll interrupt as we go along to give you some thoughts on this. Quote, with the new pontiff, will Fiducia Supplicans, the famous Vatican Declaration of 2023 that introduced the possibility of blessing James Martin-type couples into the church, end up in the attic? I don't think so. The declaration will remain. The reassurance comes from the prefect of the dicastery of the faith, Victor Manuel Fernandez, who, leaving the Vatican press room, says that there will be no changes or cancellations of any kind for one of Francis's documents that have caused the most landslides and earthquakes among the episcopate, to the point of having induced an entire continent, the African one, to a mutiny that culminated in a sort of non-prosecution agreement. To date, African episcopates are, in fact, exempted from applying that pastoral innovation in its entirety, thus avoiding blessing the couples in question. I'm going to pause here. A lot of Catholics in the West put their hopes on a great restoration coming from Africa. The African bishops, right after announcing they were not going to go along with Fiducia Supplicans, to the rightful cheers and applause of the church in the entire Western world, they also said that the church, that Rome, needs to re-examine its teaching on polyamory because it doesn't work for Africa. Africa's got a big problem with that. And they want the church's teaching changed, or an exception made to the church's teaching changed on that. So while I appreciate them standing up for the truth on Fiducia Supplicans, they need to accept the church's teaching on holy matrimony and activities suited to the married state in its entirety. I covered that story when it happened here, and people were predictably heartbroken, as they should be, because the African bishops do really good when it comes to this topic, and a few others related to it. But unfortunately, they kind of lose the plot on that one thing because it's a culture-wide problem among their flock. And they have to deal with it, and they haven't come up with a way to deal with it, so they look to the church to change its teachings on it. Doesn't work. Back to the article. For us, it remains a fundamental doctrinal problem, explained the Cardinal of Congo, Fridolin Ambongo, who at the time mediated between the different positions. The fact is that in Africa, this type of blessing is not among the pastoral priorities. For us, the priority is to live or even survive. It's life. This topic, concerning James Martin type blessings, is rather for you Europeans. I can say that when this document was released, it was a prize for us Africans, experienced as a sort of desire to impose something on us that was not at all a priority. Note how he's framing this. Not that this is a unequivocal moral wrong. The Cardinal from Africa, perhaps the highest profile one, is saying it's not a priority, and that's why we're not going to deal with this. Now, maybe he's being diplomatic. The Cardinal, who heads all the Episcopal conferences of the continent, emphasizes that it is not at all a question of marginalizing or even criminalizing the activity in question. We have respect for those who believe in this practice. We respect those who do it, and I do not even believe that the criminalization of the act, as is happening in Uganda, is a good thing. I would not say this. Cardinal Ambongo repeats, however, that the reservations expressed by Africans are not to be considered an exception, given that several European episcopates have done the same. Basically, there is a theological and moral problem, and until the Church changes the doctrine, and so far it has not changed it, I would say that the doctrinal and theological problem remains. Again, let's take stock here. The African Cardinal is basically asking the Church to formally change the doctrine on the underlying problem, and you can't do that. This isn't a doctrine. God sent his wrath upon at least 2 cities in the Old Testament for this activity. This is a sin, Scripture inerrantly tells us, that cries out to heaven for justice or vengeance, depending on your translation. It should be treated with the gravity that the Scripture says the sin bears. Cardinal Fridolin finally makes it clear that there is a need to work together. Until now, there has been a sort of crown council, the Council of Nine, composed of 9 cardinals to help Pope Francis deal with many issues. Now with Pope Leo XIV, things will change because during the conclave, the need for greater participation has clearly emerged. There will be the valorization of the cardinals, of everyone, with a collegial meeting that will be held at least once a year. The hope of the Africans remains that of embracing Pope Leo in Africa. This year, he will not be able to come to us, perhaps next year. The advantage is that he went around the world and he was the head of his religious order. To visit his brothers in the African reality is well known. My diocese, that he has already come at least twice in the past. That's their hope. Now, what do you think of Fernandez's words there and what the Cardinal had to say? Let me know in the comments. This is one of the more remarkable stories because it tells us if Fernandez is right. I don't really have any reason to think he's not right. Again, he would take a great risk if he were just to be putting words in the Pope's mouth like that, unless he had really good reason to say something like that. Unless he had reason to believe. And he has had 3 meetings, I think, now with the Pope, which is not unusual. The prefect for the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith is one of the most important positions in the Roman Curia, and the Pope, whoever he is at any time, meets with that person regularly. So don't take it to mean too much when you see reported that he met with him, because, again, it's one of the most important positions. Nobody blinks when he meets with the Cardinal Secretary of State regularly, so why would they blink when he meets with the prefect for the doctrine of the faith? This is, of course, all a matter of justice. And we turn now to the hot topic of justice. In the news lately, the Catholic Church has had a lot of questions about justice. One of the questions of justice, according to the social teaching of the Church, is that the Church can basically get along with almost any kind of regime, any kind of political system, as long as that system and that government in question allows the Church to have the freedom to do her work, which is first and foremost spreading the gospel, bringing souls to Christ, and second, helping the poor in a variety of ways. And in America, in the last month or so, in Washington state, the bishops warned everybody that the state was trying to end the the seal of confession through legal means. And then right after they issued that warning, the state legislature passed a bill doing just that, telling priests they had to violate the seal of confession, which would incur them an automatic excommunication, by the way, or they would go to jail for certain things, if certain things are confessed, including McCarrick-type offenses. The bishops basically said they're going to sue, and the Trump administration has recently, as I reported here, announced that they're looking into the situation and may be taking the state of Washington to court over this on religious freedom grounds. All of this got the attention of Bishop Robert Barron, who is one of the most popular figures in the church in America, and he is near the top of my list of people you should expect to see get a promotion under Pope Leo sooner rather than later. That's just a hunch that I have, but his time in that smaller diocese he's in, when there are going to be Episcopal appointments or Episcopal sees available in archdioceses, some very high-profile ones coming very soon, keep an eye on Bishop Barron. We go here to Catholic World Report for the headline. Bishop Barron urges court to strike down Washington law that targets the seal of confession. Posted yesterday on the 4th of July. Now, honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of Bishop Barron. He's great on the subject of scientism. I will never denigrate him on the issue of scientism. He is wonderful on that. And he's also wonderful on the issue of people not believing in the real presence of our blessed Lord Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. But he's very wishy-washy on things like, can he be saved outside the church? And he's very wishy-washy on a lot of other doctrinal and theological issues that stem from Vatican II. But he's generally on the more conservative side of the post-Vatican II order of things. And he has brought unequivocally a lot of people into Catholicism. Again, I can't denigrate him for that, so I have mixed feelings on him. But this is like Bishop Barron at his best, right here. The borderline angry Bishop Barron warning about the overreaches of Caesar. So we go here to this article, which was important enough that the Catholic News Agency and the Catholic World Report published this on the 4th of July. Bishop Robert Barron on July 4th urged a federal court to strike down a Washington state law that would force priests to violate the seal of confession, telling the court the law is manifestly disrespectful of the ancient and vital church practice. Barron, the Bishop of Winona Rochester and a member of the White House Religious Liberty Commission, made the argument in a proposed amicus brief filed in U.S. District Court in Washington state. The filing comes on behalf of the bishops of Washington state, who in May of this year sued the state government over its new mandatory reporting law that requires priests to report a harm done to the most young learned during the sacrament of confession or face jail time and fines. And then it goes on to talk about how this has drawn a lot of ire from a lot of people. And I think what we can do here is just take a look here at the amicus brief, maybe at least the summary of it, or the introduction, because this is an important document, and it should almost be the subject of its own live stream. It's because it's a really big document. Amicus briefs, friend of the court briefs, basically, are taken seriously when they are filed by serious people, and a bishop of the Catholic Church who works for the White House is going to be considered a very serious person. Amicus Curiae Bishop Robert Barron respectfully moves to file a brief in support of plaintiffs in the United States motions for preliminary injunctions against SB 5375 as applied to the seal of confession. The Most Reverend Robert Barron is the Bishop of the Diocese of Winona Rochester, Minnesota, and a leading teacher of the Catholic faith in the U.S. Bishop Barron is a current member of the U.S. Religious Liberty Commission established by executive order. The executive order directs its members to consider, among other things, the First Amendment rights of pastors, religious leaders, houses of worship, and faith-based institutes. Bishop Barron addressed the impact of the state bill on those rights at the Commission's first meeting, June 16th. Thus, Bishop Barron has a designated interest in ensuring the First Amendment rights of priests and penitents upheld in courts and preventing encroachments on those rights from spreading to other jurisdictions. What he's doing here is establishing in his amicus brief his own credentials for filing something with the court. Okay. And he's reminding them of their broad discretion, citing precedents in striking down these kinds of things. And what he's hoping for is that they will act sooner rather than later to end this stupid practice that an apostate sponsored in the state legislature. Yes, a former Catholic, an apostate, a self-admitted former Catholic, sponsored all the way through the state legislature of Washington State, and was signed into law by a professed practicing Catholic. He earned his excommunication, by the way, when doing that. There's virtually no debate on that, except from, of course, the most virulently anti-Catholic portion of the Catholic Church, the National Catholic Reporter types. They all earned their excommunication when they tried to essentially shackle the courts and have priests lead themselves into either jail or excommunication. These are the kinds of people that the church has to deal with these days. Back to the main article. The law has drawn criticism from religious liberty advocates who say it unjustly targets Catholics. The Department of Justice and a coalition of Orthodox churches have also sued the state government over the rule. The Confraternity of Catholic Clergy, representing over 500 Catholic priests and deacons from the U.S., Australia, and the United Kingdom, last month issued a statement defending the inviolability of the seal of confession, arguing against laws like Washington State's, and they've attempted this in Australia too, by the way, and pointing out that the protection of the most young can be lawfully and morally done without violating religious liberty. Barron's brief stressed to the court what it described as the often misunderstood theological underpinnings of the seal of confession. Few religious practices are more understood than the sacred seal of confession in the Catholic Church, the bishop wrote in the document. Since Catholics believe that penitents who seek the sacrament of confession are speaking to and hearing from the Lord himself via the priest, then absolutely nothing ought to stand in the way of a sinner who seeks this font of grace, Barron wrote. If a penitent is aware that the priest might, let alone must, share with others what was given in the most sacred confidence, he or she would be reluctant indeed to ever approach confession, he said. The bishop argued that the state law is manifestly premised on a disrespect for the confessional seal, in part because it explicitly exempts clergy from an otherwise broad exception for privileged communications. And it goes on to talk about how it goes into effect on July 27th, this year, just a few weeks from now, and will essentially violate the First Amendment. Nakedly on its face, it does. That's not even a question at this point. Now, that's not only, of course, our only topic of justice today. We had an interesting news that broke. It happened late on the 4th of July, which is when these things often break, weekends or holidays, because not everybody in the world takes the 4th of July off. And it's this. Take this as good news. Father Marco Rupnik, he has a trial now in the Vatican, and they've announced who some of the participants in this are going to be. You go back now to Il Messaggero, who talks about how the horrible Rupnik case under Leo XIV is destined to go forward. Again, this is a Google Chrome translating issue. The judging panel has been identified, meaning the judges in this have been identified. And actually, it was posted on July 3rd, but it got no attention because this past week has been very slow in the news and on YouTube. Here are the details. You can consider this good news, but listen to the names here. So, is it actually good news? We have found the judges who will try Father Marco Ivan Rupnik, the former Jesuit theologian and world-famous artist, dismissed in June 2023 from the Society of Jesus, accused of psychological and fleshly harm by some nuns. It's putting it mildly. Cardinal Victor Fernandez, prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, quickly answers journalists as he rushes out for the Vatican press room where the green mass for the defense of creation has just been presented. Up until now, this horrible case of evil against an unspecified number of nuns, about 30 are said to have been, has been handled in total opacity and obvious embarrassment. Rupnik is a personal friend of many cardinals and even of Pope Francis and St. John Paul II, and as a result, has always enjoyed a particularly respectful position within the Vatican, which certainly slowed down the course of justice. In any case, the date is not yet known exactly when the trial will begin, and Fernandez dismisses the question with a few words. I can't say anything. There are the technical times of the canonical process. Now it will be necessary to notify the victims formally. The important thing he added was the choice of judges. It was a very difficult thing. End quote. There's more here, and we'll go into it just a moment. I suspect that Fernandez will be among the judges. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I hope I'm wrong. But at least the church can move forward on this question. Rupnik will get his day in court, an ecclesiastical court, who will probably not put him in a jail cell because, to my knowledge, the Vatican hasn't dusted off its Middle Ages dungeons, although it really should for men like him. He is For those who don't know, and I'm going to say this as delicately as I can, not just because of YouTube's rules, but because I can barely bring myself to verbalize the evil things that he did. And I can't bring myself to verbalize everything he did. But he used his authority as a priest who was overseeing a religious order of nuns, one that's basically defunct now because of what he did to them, to turn them into his, we'll say, playthings. He used his authority. He used his charisma. He has apparently a lot of charisma, and they treated him the way many founders and religious orders are treated. Founders and religious orders are typically canonized later in life if their religious order thrives. Think about the influence that has. And he coerced many of them, and coerce is definitely the right word, to violate their vows with him. And then he would absolve them of their sins that he committed with them in the confessional, which is what earned him his automatic excommunication. He did things involving mass implements that I can't bring myself to say, other than to say that he desecrated them in the most heinous and impure way imaginable. And it's that and the use of the seal of confession that caused the modern Jesuit order, I want you to think about how bad this has to be, the contemporary Jesuits to excommunicate him, to kick him out of the Jesuit order and report him to Rome. And he incurred an automatic excommunication, which was then lifted by Pope Francis. And Rupnik was put back into doing pastoral work and right back to making his hideous art. Now he has a day in court. We don't know the date, but Fernandez can give us a little bit more here. Quote, "It was about dispelling any suspicion that there could be interests of someone in the dicastery. The important thing was to look for people who would not give rise to any suspicion. In choosing the robes, the Vatican's objective was to find people who had no interest and were above suspicion. Now they are working with the necessary confidentiality." When asked how it was possible to excommunicate Rupnik and then lift the excommunication, Cardinal Fernandez admitted, "It happens more often than you might imagine. Sometimes the excommunication is imposed and lifted on the same day." Leo XIV in the Millstoke of the Rupnik case, this is another article they have about how this is essentially like an albatross around that the Pope has to carry. The news that judges have finally been found, something that seemed difficult until 4 months ago, Fernandez had said at the time, is welcomed by the victim's lawyer with a good dose of caution. That the judging panel has been identified is certainly good news. Now let the trial begin soon, allowing the victims to participate as injured parties and not only as witnesses, to protect their right to defense and transparency, as necessary as confidentiality. There will certainly be maximum cooperation on the part of my clients in reconstructing the facts in a search for the truth. And it goes on. So tune in here. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe, because I will be covering that trial when it happens, whenever it happens. But at least now we have that much, and that is good news. Wilson says, lipstick on a pig. The Vatican, by its own admission, has problems within its walls with the James Martin kind of behavior. Yes, that might be the case. We'll see what happens with Rupnik, and it seems pretty open and shut. It's doubtful that so many nuns who were so damaged by him, so that they had to leave their religious orders, would all make up stories about him. I suppose it could be the case. He, like anybody else, deserves his trial in court and deserves due process. Now, I'm curious what you think about all of this. Cat, I guess you didn't know about the mass implements. Yeah, it's worse than you probably think. That's all I can say. Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. And if you've ever thought about supporting the work we do here at Return to Tradition, bringing you all these news stories from far-flung parts of the world, doing things that hardly anybody else does in this space, there are options in the description box below. Patreon, Subscribe Star, a couple other things, and the Subscribe Plus button is the Join button, all of which were options asked for by viewers of the channel. It does help keep these daily messages coming and is greatly appreciated. Pray for everybody we spoke about today. Not trying to make you angry at Cardinal Fernandez, certainly not trying to make you angry at Bishop Barron or even Father Rupnik. They all need your prayers, so please pray for them. And pray for the Pope as well, because regardless whatever else you might think of him, he faces a lot of pressures that I can't even imagine. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine.